Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is me, Jonathan Alexander, and I'm here to host our show, Life After Happiness. We need to add some words to that song. I mean, it's like, Johnny can give the description right about that. Yeah.
I already
Johnny
have it memorized. You cannot get that tune out of your head. Oh, it's brand new, by the way.
We need to write words, something about Johnny getting words wrong on the description, and
it's a little
he
long.
can't get any words right. He needs Kelly to help him.
Are they going to introduce the bride or the minister? Okay.
But anyway, so Barbara, it's great that you're here. This is the host, Barbara, and
hi everybody.
Barbara, this is an interview by Barbara Moore show. Why don't you introduce your guests, everyone?
Okay.
Oh, wait, before we go, I want to see what they. Our website is www.lifelaughterhappiness.com. And that's our community website. So go on, Barbara. Sorry about that. Go.
Okay, that's fine. Wow, what a tune. Okay, well, we are so happy about our guest today, Albert Lanier. He is a writer and freelance journalist. Although Albert is now retired, I was talking to Albert earlier today, and I'm just curious to what retirement means to him, because to me he seems quite active as a writer.
Yeah.
But Albert has had quite a career for the past 25 years, writing for magazines and newspapers in publications like in places like Hawaii, Washington State, where I'm from, and California, where I live now. For Honolulu Weekly, Pacific Business News, Hawaii Magazine, Puget Sound Business Journal, Asian Week, and Hawaiian Film and Video. And now, for the past 2 years, he's been writing a blog about media and news media on media.com. So welcome to the show, Albert. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Barbara. I have to say, before we go any further, I'm really quite happy to be doing this show. Not only because it's different from every other show, but because I have to admit this: you're one of my favorite Playboy playmates. So. Oh,
really?
This is like,
wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's something I never thought would happen. I'm like, wow, I'm being interviewed by Barbara Moore. It's like, it's really
and how
quite
perfect
quite
is
an honor.
that? Because
I know.
I didn't even know you before you reached out to me.
I've often said, Albert, that it wouldn't surprise me if Barbara Moore got tested and had an IQ of 160. I mean, she's extremely resourceful. I mean, it's like I buy her something and then she uses it and then she turns it into she'll make these wonderful things from it. So I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's like she changed my life for the better.
Oh, thanks.
I can believe that. I can believe it.
Both of you guys.
Your introduction was perfect. I mean, I've been interviewed for 10 years on numerous shows, and they're, when you're in podcast and internet talk shows, the level of hosting varies, but you were just dead on. I wouldn't have thought that that you were. I mean, you've done a lot of things. Like you're a Playboy Playmate. You're like a ballroom dancer, champion one. You're an actress, but I mean, I would have thought that you were like a professional radio person. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
the
the intro was nice. I mean, it was. I mean, you're just great.
Wow. God.
I'm like,
you.
It's unusual
Make me
for
feel
me
good.
because I don't. Yeah, it's unusual for me because I've never been interviewed by a Playboy Playmate, which is nice, but also.
I know
and
the tables are now turned because I'm sure you have had to interview a lot of people.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. Last night I was watching.
Sorry, go on.
Last night I was
Albert.
watching it. Okay. Last night I was watching a documentary about Mike Wallace, and known, for Mike Wallace. For those who don't know, he used to be one of the hosts of 60 Minutes, and he was a notorious interviewer, very hard interviewer, going after
him.
people with his ambush interview. And so I was watching a documentary about him. So when you mentioned interview, we're like, because I was watching him being interviewed by his colleagues on 60 Minutes, the footage of that, and I thought, oh, okay. It's interesting seeing the interviewer getting interviewed, but in the 10 years that I've been on different podcasts and radio shows being interviewed, it's been, I guess, the table's being turned on me, except I've never been on TV as an interview. I've been a print interview. Very different in terms of the way.
Do you find? We said before the show, and I think I want to make sure that we repeat this again for Barbara's sake. You said something about models, the cliches that they'd be very difficult to interview, but in actuality, it's the opposite. And I told you that.
Yeah, I would like to have him clarify that. Both of you guys clarify that for the listeners, because it's not what they think, right, guys?
This is something we both discovered. Okay.
Well, in the 22 years I was a freelance writer and a print journalist. I was writing for magazines and newspapers. I did some other kind of writing. There were a couple of times where I interviewed a couple of models, and maybe more than a couple, but at least two. And I had to not only interview them, but I had to also shoot them with whatever camera that I had from the newspaper. I didn't have like lights and bounce cards and stuff like that. I just had natural light and the beach, and that was about it, or backyard of someone's house. That was about it. So what I found, though, in talking to models and working with models in that context was that they are prepared, and they have models that I've seen and I've quote-unquote worked with in that context and dealt with are prepared and disciplined. And there's the level of discipline that involves with modeling. So the normal majority media or major media stereotype that you see in TV shows and movies is that models are difficult, bitchy, angry.
Or not smart, or not intelligent.
Or dumb.
What they do
which is
what they do
stupid
is
to me. I never understood that.
They think you can't. I think what it is nobody believes that you can have both. They think like, oh, well, she's gorgeous. Oh, well, she can't be gorgeous and smart, or she can't be. And the thing is, like I was saying before the show, because I want to have a chance to clarify this too. In college and in school, the most stressful part of the test is actually not the test; it's the studying and the preparing. The people who don't study and don't prepare, they have a stressful test, but the ones who are ready, the test isn't really that stressful. It's just some little thing that you just take and and like, for instance, there's a picture of Barbara where I think I saw of her, and she has her foot on a boat and she has her hand up in the air, and I'm thinking to myself, she looks gorgeous, if you saw this picture. But then you think, how much preparing went into that picture? Probably a lot, And it's sort of like,
John,
why are you
you're
laughing?
so funny. I had to but some pictures, it just happens. But that particular one, yes, I did have to get the background set with other people, and they were good sports about it. But it looked really natural, didn't it? It was out. We were jet boating, and it was out on the beach.
It's a compliment to you to be kind of the kind of person where you say, okay, well, it's like, all right, let's do this, let's stand this way, let's look this way, and I guess the reason I like that is it makes you feel like the person cares about being interviewed.
Yeah.
It's like they say, it's like if I'll say, like they'll say, well, let's go over that last question. Let's put a word in front of that question. Let's change the setting of this question. Okay, and somebody wants to help you with something, and then they pay attention to the details. It really, I'm sure you've noticed this when you interview someone, Albert, that you feel a lot better when they start saying things like, okay, let me help you do it by doing this. Does this come across easier when I say this?
Well,
instead?
yeah, but Johnny, hold on. You can stop people up, right, Albert? Because if you try to change them too much, they could get nervous, self-conscious, and you can stop the whole flow up. So there's a fine line between over-directing something and just making it a natural process. So I think how I would describe myself is I feel like I make people feel comfortable. Do I?
Right.
You do. I mean,
I think you do, frankly.
Thank you.
Because from the very beginning, well, part of it is your voice.
Really?
That's
and
true.
Of course, well, yeah, you have a pleasant voice. That's probably why you were brought on the show in the first place.
Thank you.
Actually, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons she was brought on the show, but it wasn't just the voice. But I can tell you, she's an extremely open-minded person. She's an extremely smart person. When we talk about substitutes, she's always willing to have something to add. She's always willing to suggest things. She changed my life and Kelly's life for the better. So, I mean, you're right. She does have a great voice. And she has a lot to the table. She's a wonderful human being. God gave a gift to the world when he made her.
Oh, Johnny. You guys are just like boosting my ego so much. But like my brother says, if she hasn't let it go to her head yet, it's not going to. Right?
Right.
But thank you guys. And I just wanted to say one last thing before we get into our first question with Albert is that Albert paid me such the highest compliment when he said, when I reached out to you, you got back to me and it was just like, boom, 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 like a turnkey operation, just like so professionally done and just so like he was amazed by that. And I didn't know. So because I'm new at the radio career and I didn't know, I was just doing it as like common sense stuff, So that really was the best compliment ever.
Oh, I'm glad that you saw it as a compliment, which it is, but also that you liked what I was saying about your skills. I mean, I can see what he says about you is extremely true.
Wow, because you've done a lot of podcasts, right?
I've done my share, yeah. I mean, at least maybe 10 years of it, and plus radio shows and other shows. So I mean, I've been interviewed. I think on a minimum. I've been interviewed a minimum. I think maybe it's 3 to 5 times a year. And the odd thing is, I'm somebody who never thought. I'm a local and regional journalist and freelancer. I'm not a national star. I'm not somebody who was ever in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or even working in TV. I was saying on Twitter not long ago, I said, guys like me don't wind up on MSNBC. We don't get interviewed on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and so forth. So I never thought that I'd be interviewed by anybody. I thought I would be interviewing people, which I had, and writing stories, and was 10 years ago. About 10 years ago or so, where I got interviewed for the first time on a station called WLEA in New York, upstate New York, Cornellsville. It was for a show called The Newsmaker Show. And I was being interviewed about an article I wrote for Honolulu Weekly called Variable Wind Trade, which was about a company called First Wind that was building wind turbine farms, and wanted to build one in Hawaii. I think they did, but not where they initially wanted to, which was the island of Molokai. And I had first heard about, and they were under investigation by the state of New York for ethics. So I found out about that by living on the island of Molokai initially, and I was writing for a publication called Molokai Dispatch. I was a staff writer there. It was the first and only staff writing job I've ever had. And I had to move to Molokai and work there for a brief time, which was, I call my, Northern Exposure experience, like the TV show.
Right.
I felt like main character there, is interesting because I was actually I was in Seattle because I was in LA and then I was going to Seattle. I was looking to move back. I had lived in Seattle in 1995 to 96 and worked there. And I like to say that I am, quote, straight out of Capitol Hill, because that was my neighborhood.
Which I love,
and I understand,
that area, being from Seattle.
Yeah. And I know you're from Seattle, Washington.
Yes.
I had read you were born in Spokane. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. But I only lived there for 6 months, so I grew up in Seattle.
Okay, great. Where in Seattle did you grow up, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, Monroe area, like Snohomish County. But my dad, it was an every other weekend type thing. So my dad worked downtown Seattle. He was a bush pilot. He was a seaplane pilot on Lake Washington and Lake Union. So I was one of those kids who knew everything about Seattle, and not a lot of those country bumpkins up there in Snohomish, Cowtown, horse country, had even been to Seattle, and it was only 45 minutes away. So
really?
I just always have to make that clear. Yes, they never had even been ventured. Their parents had never even taken them to the wonderful city. So I always have to make that clear, because if I say, Snohomish, they're like, well, that's not Seattle. Well,
that's
I'm
true.
different. Yeah, so I knew all about it. I knew about the music scene. My brother was a musician. I went down there to concerts all the time, and I know Capitol Hill. So you lived in the totally cool area, Albert. That's awesome.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you. I loved Capitol Hill, still love it to this day. And I was above Broadway. For those people listening who know Seattle, I lived above Broadway, so I'd go to Broadway. It's a very convenient neighborhood because I could just go down to Broadway and shop, restaurants, and I would, of course, sometimes go to Dick's Drive-In, which was one of my favorite places, especially when I had money.
It's like eclectic, right? It's eclectic. It's natural. You got all types there.
Right. And
but hold on, Albert, because I want the listeners to know you were born and raised in Honolulu, but then lived in Seattle for a while. So I wanted everybody to know that, because living in Hawaii, for all of us who have just visited Hawaii, we think, you're so lucky. It's so wonderful. Wow, that's great. But you were telling me earlier that it's not the same. Something's changed. What has changed?
Well, for one thing, homelessness. There's a lot of homelessness here on Oahu. I live in Honolulu. And so Oahu, the island of Oahu, is where Honolulu is. And so in Honolulu, there's a lot of homeless. On the entire island of Oahu, there's a good deal of homeless. And there's a lot of homelessness over
why? You know why, though? There's a lot of homeless in Seattle, too, because it's a mild climate. So it doesn't get too cold or too hot where they can't be outdoors. So it's kind of like they migrate there. So it does make sense, although it's really sad.
Well, Seattle is, they have a degree of homelessness in regards to that city, too. And, what I hear about Seattle is, when San Francisco and L.A., they have their homeless problems or their financial problems, Seattle is the one that's beginning to come up, and which I think is unfortunate. But At least Seattle, there you've got Nicholsville, you've got camps for the homeless, you've got tent cities there, which is a lot better than some places in this country. So Seattle has at least got some way of trying to deal with the homeless problem, which I appreciate. They're trying their best. And it's a wonderful city. I've always loved Seattle. I love living there. And I'm hoping possibly to go back. I don't know if it'll happen, but I'm hoping to go back. Hopefully next year. We'll see. And
that's great. That's so great.
Yeah,
because you are retired now. But even when you were not retired, it's like, why even say you're retired when you're freelance, meaning you take what you want to take? Isn't that what freelance is? Because when I read about you, it's so much about freelance. What to you was so important about being freelance? Because you had mentioned earlier on the show that you only had one job where you were a staff writer. So what's the difference there?
Oh, interesting you point that out. A staff writer is what most people think of when you talk about journalists. They're employees of publications, magazines, newspapers. They're like any other employee in that sense that they work 40 hours or whatever the full-time job rate is. A freelancer is by definition a independent contractor, which means that they're essentially in business for themselves. You can be a self-proprietor, and like other businesses, you can have an LLC, limited liability corporation. You can have an S corp or C corp or something like that. So it depends on how you want to arrange that. But that's becoming a bigger issue these days because California had passed Assembly Bill 5, which was meant to deal with, I believe it was the misuse of independent contractor status to Lyft drivers and Uber drivers and other kinds of businesses. They were misusing it. And now will have an impact on freelancers because in California they put a cap, which is like 35 submissions. So that's been causing problems. Because I was intending to come back to California either this year or next year, and that law is pretty much it's going to prevent me from coming back because I would have to go back to freelancing to live in California again, and I just don't know what impact the law will have. A lot of my colleagues in California are very concerned, worried, because it impacts a range of independent contractors and small business people.
Well, what do you mean by only 35 submissions? What do you mean by that? Because I get that when you are on the staff and when you're pretty much free, and I would always want to be a freelance model. I mean, that's wonderful. You're running your own show. But, what does this mean, this law, 35 submissions?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think submission, it's tricky. The law itself that I've read is I'd have to go back and read the actual law itself that they passed. I've read the drafts. I wrote actually a article about this issue in California, which was called No Justice, No Peace, PIECE. What we think about when we talk about freelancing in California. So that's one thing people can look at in regards to that issue. But that's a good question, Barbara. The person who credited with writing the bill is Lorena Gonzalez, who's an assemblywoman.
Can you hold that thought really quick? Because Johnny had a question, too, about that. What was that, Johnny?
Okay.
Well, it was something, actually what I'm curious about because, we're trying to get ourselves out there to get ourselves well known. And I've often wondered, if you were to get or ask a newspaper article, say, to write a story on this, do we necessarily go to one of the reporters or do we go to the editor?
In terms of being a freelancer?
Well, yeah, what would be the chain of command? Is what I'm curious. Do we go, for instance, because you would know the answer to that. You work for newspapers. Would you have the authority to decide what gets printed, or would you have to run it past the editor?
Well, normally if you're a freelancer, you if you're looking to write for a publication, you have to look at their policies, which are usually online. You go to their website, and they will outline what's required. Like some publications, I think a number of them want you to what is known as pitch. Now, I know Barbara has been an actress, so she has an understanding of the film business to some extent, TV business. You know, like screenwriters go in and pitch to executives. And also, I guess in that vein, not quite the same, but freelancers pitch to editors. So you normally would write what is known as a query letter to an editor, and a query letter would outline the aspects of your idea for an article. And sometimes, I think, if I recall correctly, you would include maybe sample paragraphs, possible paragraph, and so that's the normal process for pitching an article is writing a query letter. I guess these days would be email.
Because Johnny wants us to get an interview, our show. I think that's what he means. Life After Happiness. Get articles out there because.
Oh, I see.
There is nothing like the written word.
Right.
But I want to say
interesting
before we go on.
That aspect, because I'm pitching to get articles and pieces and magazines for myself as a freelancer. That other aspect, I haven't thought too much about that, what entities do. I guess do you guys have a publicist or something?
Not yet.
Not yet. But, actually,
we don't.
I was going to say this about Barbara. The name of the show, Life After Happiness, Barbara really personifies it.
Right.
Oh, thank you.
So I would think more in terms of if you're looking to pitch for interviews for the show, because Barbara is such a big part of the show, I guess she's the face of the show. Would that be accurate to say?
Well, no, we're equal. We are all three faces.
Okay.
And our three faces, we like to be equal. Nothing goes past anybody unless we all three discuss it first.
Well, that's good to hear, but if you're looking they're going to want some kind of hook, publications are. So
the hook.
I understand the way your show is set up, but they're going to want some kind of hook. So most likely
we can
the hook.
Give them the hook. They can use Playboy Playmate, right, Johnny? He has no problem with that.
No.
Yeah, I think that there's a big story there. It's like I think what I would say, the only reason I say that you talk about a hook. All three of us, I think we fill up the weaknesses of the other. Like there's a very good reason why Barbara's here. It's a long story of how we met and everything, and I think the one thing that me, Kelly, and Barbara will all agree with is we were very, 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 very sad before we got busy with the show. I mean, I think that's I think Barbara would say that's probably true, right, Barbara?
Well, I have not been sad since I've started because, you know what, Johnny? You were sad before Kelly and I came along. Once we came along, you have not been sad, right? Since we've come along.
What I'm saying is the show, before we asked you to come on the show, you were going through a period where you were really kind of down.
I just had a very bad accident. I had a very bad accident, which led me to you guys because of their healing, chakra healing to me, and that was totally cool.
That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say, Barbara.
Everything happens for a reason. I truly believe everything happens for a reason, and also that Albert's here today. Everything happens for a reason. Do you believe that, Albert?
Interesting.
You don't?
I think I don't know if everything happens for a reason. I tend to think that part of life is an unfolding mystery. And that as a person who is a rational person and a logical person and who is, I guess, maybe a logical empiricist to a great extent, and somebody who tends to take that view of life, I understand that not everything can be explained, even though I'm a rational person, a logical person. So thus, there is a mystery. Things happen for no reason, and they happen for reasons that aren't explained at the time or aren't available. So I tend to view life from the standpoint of half of life contains reasons, as you note. Some things are done for a reason, and so I would say some aspects of life, some things happen for a reason, and others do not happen for a reason. And I understand that, and I accept the mystery of existence. I accept the mysteries of life.
Well,
I may
yes,
not like
and
all
that we had a scientist on before, and that falls under the category of philosophy, really, because he was saying, well, because I was asking him that too. Like, if everything, is already planned and already done, and it's already going to have the same outcome, and it's already known by the higher power, well, no, I think there's a lot of things that could happen in between that, and without that mystery, life would be so boring. And it really is philosophical, all that, and it's very interesting too. And
yeah,
I
would
could go
say,
on and on about that. I love it.
Right, but yeah, you could call it philosophical. I've never really considered myself a philosophical person, although I've read philosophy in the past. I've read, I think it was Kierkegaard and even Nietzsche and some of those philosophers in the past. Bertrand Russell is one that I like when it comes to philosophy, but I read very little philosophy. I don't really get into philosophy. But I think Bertrand Russell's about the last philosopher that I got any interest in. But yeah, I think you have a point. I think it is somewhat philosophical. I believe, there are rational, logical people who think everything can be explained by logic and reason. And true logic and reason is saying not everything can be explained. Not everything has an answer to it. Not everything is done for a reason. There are things that don't have answers, that can't be explained, and that don't have reason. And having true reason and logic means that you understand that. That's always been the stance I've taken as a empirical person, as a logical person, a rational person.
Well, I like that. I like that too.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you try to impose logic on everything and think you can solve every mystery, you're going to drive yourself nuts. You drive yourself nuts.
But did you find it really like a compliment when you started to get interviewed by people on basically your interview, your articles, your writings? Basically, they were interviewing about what you wrote. So that's pretty cool, right? How did that make you feel?
It's interesting you bring that up. That's a good question. I'm kind of getting questions that I've never gotten on other shows. So this is really interesting to me. I'm just going to say that right out front.
Well, thank you. You're so sweet.
Thank you. You asked very interesting questions. And I think I had, just like I was watching the Mike Wallace documentary, I think it's called This Is Mike Wallace. I was thinking, and I what I thought was, when I go on a show like Life, Laughter, and Happiness, or any other podcast or radio show or a program, I'm kind of in that hot seat like Mike. Although I have, I'm critical of Mike Wallace, but I'm in that hot seat. And I would say when I did my first interview, I was interviewed for the first time in 2009. I really didn't understand what it was like to be interviewed, primarily because I interviewed people. So I interviewed people, I talked to people, but I had no way of knowing what it was like to be the person being asked questions, to have to open up, to have to state information or state anything. And once I got on, I think it was the Newsmaker show, with the station WLEA in Hornell, New York, and talk about wind power in my article, that's when I began that journey to beginning to understand what it was like to be interviewed.
And what was it like? What did you find out?
I found out that it's very different. You have to experience it yourself. I think it's like a number of things in life. You can't intellectually just think about being interviewed. I think, well, I'll answer the question by approaching it almost like a split screen in a movie or TV show. What I learned about interviewing people was this, and this is my technique, my style, however people want to call it. I'm not Larry King, and I'm certainly not Mike Wallace, or Ted Koppel. My technique as somebody who interviewed other people was, and what I found was, that interviewing is an improvisational phenomenon. What I found was that, and I never wrote questions down. I just did my research. I read what I needed to read and tried to prepare the best I could, and then went to the interview and asked questions. But I asked questions as I was in the moment, as they say about acting. So I'm asking questions then and there. I don't write it down. I don't have anything else prepared other than the knowledge that I have. I may have sheets of documents. I may have other notes of other things, but my questions were never written down. In 22 years of being a journalist, I never wrote questions down. It was all from the top of my head. So you do the research, but you're asking in and of the moment. So it's an improvisational phenomena. So, and the reason I did that, because what I understood was that interviewing in and of itself is a sort of forced phenomena. It's interrogative. It's a phenomena that isn't entirely natural. It's not like a natural conversation. A natural conversation has ebbs and flows and moves, zigs and zags, and goes off in different directions. It's not always logical. It's not always rational. I guess there maybe is a mysterious component to it, perhaps. I don't know. But that's what I discovered from the time I started as a journalist and a writer, which was in 1994. That's what I discovered, that it's improvisational. You have to go with the flow. It's almost like surfing. You have to get on that wave and, let the wave take you where it will. And maybe so as an interviewer, I understood that. Oh, it's improvisational. And that's the way that I did my interview. I agree with Larry King in the sense that Larry King would always ask why questions, and I would ask why questions myself at times. But I was always interested in the kind of why and how. Because in journalism, at least when I took, going back to high school journalism, they teach you the 5 W's and 1 H, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I'm interested in the why and the how primarily. That's what I'm interested in interviewing. Now, I described just now my stance as an interviewer. Now, as somebody being interviewed, what I had to do was, instead of going with the flow in terms of the question, it's different. You have to, in a sense, trust yourself, and you have to be able to, I'm going to really be ridiculed for saying this, but I'm going to say it. It's almost like Star Wars. It's almost like, whether it's A New Hope, I'm a bit of a sci-fi fan, fantasy fan myself, but it's almost like Star Wars. When Obi-Wan Kenobi in the first film, A New Hope, says, you have to trust in the Force, and and tap into that energy. When somebody's asking a question, you just really have to be able to go with the flow in a different way, but you've got to be able to reach out and answer that. To me, it's like
kind of like dancing, right, Albert? Like you prepare, and once you're on the floor, you don't think about anything else. You just let it flow, and you go with the ride, and you enjoy the dance. So you prepared for the interview, prepare, and then once that interview started, you were enjoying it, which then in turn made it so authentic and real and great and not forced, and then more wonderful things come from that. I think that is why you were so successful.
Well, I think that's a good description. I really do. I think it's an apt description. But getting back to being interviewed, I had to learn how to be an interviewee instead of the interviewer. It's a very different kind of experience. So you have to fundamentally trust yourself. You have to trust yourself that you will give answers that are rational, logical, and make sense, but also trust that you're doing the right thing for yourself. I think what makes people good interviewees, so to speak, is that they have an inherent trust in their own abilities in whatever they do, whether that's being an artist, musician, politician even. It gets to a point where you can give glib answers to glib questions. But fundamentally, I think what makes it... Okay.
I have a question. I want your opinion of these sorts of interviews, because this is something that many years ago there was Fidel Castro was being interviewed on television, and my father, I haven't told you this, is from Cuba, so he's seen Fidel Castro. He's seen him, he knows exactly the kind of person that he is, that he's a horrible person and everything. But the problem is that it makes me wonder, what's the point of interviewing Fidel Castro? Because the moment you go to see Fidel Castro, who has since passed away, and the moment that you are in an interview with him, he's in control over what is said and what you talk about. So, I mean, it almost makes me feel like, what's the point of why do people do those interviews if, you're not going to get him to admit he can sit there and lie to you and you can't control what he says? I mean, what do you think about those interviews?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. That is the basic aspect of an interview. That an interviewer has a certain amount of control over what he's going to ask you, and to a certain extent, boundaries. Although with Hollywood celebrities and others, they want questions in advance, which I've never done. They want, or politicians in particular, they want questions in advance, which I've never allowed. I've never given them questions in advance. I can give them an area in advance, but that's about it. They want certain boundaries, what you will and won't talk about. It's harder and harder nowadays with interviews to just ask about everything under the sun, unless you go to a podcast like this one or a show like this one. I mean, I think that's why Joe Rogan and the Joe Rogan Experience is kind of a successful show, because people go on that show and they're talking about all kinds of things and experiences and so forth. I think that's the success of podcasts in particular. But yeah, you're describing, I think, a certain component of how the dynamic of interviews are set up. And I think if you are the interviewee, what I've learned as an interviewee was that, again, I have to trust myself. And so if I don't want to answer something, I'm not going to. And you have to trust yourself that you will say the right thing and you will make a logical answer to a hopefully logical question. But it's almost, in many respects, like I mentioned, Star Wars, using the Force. But let's use something not fictional, but also applicable to everyday life, which is something, or some aspects of life, which is tennis. When a serve is hit at you, you've got to respond or you lose. In many respects, an interview is like that. But you have to trust your ability. Somebody hits that tennis ball at you, you've got to be able to return. And so you've got to trust your ability, and I would say your ability as a human being, not as a celebrity, not as a personality, not as a politician or some public figure or what have you, but as a human being. Because ultimately the best interviews are about one human being talking to another human being. And that's what an interview should be. But the nature of interviews is that they're interrogative conversations. They're not entirely real conversations. Because the whole point is, I, the interviewer, I'm seeking information from you, the interviewee, the person. And that's what we want. My goal as a journalist, in terms of interviews, was to find out, who is this person? If I were interviewing Barbara, I want to find out, who is Barbara Moore? Who is she? I'm not interested in. Yeah, I'm not interested in Barbara Moore, the Playboy Playmate, although on one level I am. But that's not as important to me. Barbara Moore, the actress. Barbara Moore, the model. Those are interesting parts of her life and of your life, Barbara.
Or Barbara Moore, the mom.
They don't interest me as much as who Barbara is, what she's about, and why she is who she is.
Right.
You want to try to get to the core of the person. And the problem with a lot of interviews is they're not set up that way. It's the nature of interviewing. It's hard to do that. It's difficult to do that because people come to an interview.
Well, yeah, they always wanted to interview you on your interview. They want to interview you on your article. I mean, we have really not even touched upon any of your articles. And look at, we've already talked to you for 45 minutes, and we're finding out what your thoughts are, what makes you tick,
precisely.
Your feeling. Because when you were saying that, I want to know the how, not just the why. Well, you know what I want to know beyond that? I want to know, how does that make you feel? Okay? Why, how, and how do you feel about it? That's what I like. I like to know how that person feels. That's what gets me excited to find out.
Right. I think that's a part of it. I'm more interested in what a person thinks, but feeling is a part of it. You want to know how they felt about this experience and that aspect and this component of their life.
And I love it. And when you tell us, that made me feel good, or this made me feel, wow, that was different. And because we don't think about that. You know, how you always interviewed everybody, and now you're in the hot seat, and now you're because guess what? Everything that you wanted to portray about yourself in the interview, maybe you weren't thinking about, a simple question that the audience finds interesting that you would think, that's not interesting, but to a lot of people it is. Those kinds of things. So that's why what I love about what you said is that you just kind of go with the flow too. You know, you said that about me, but I think you do as well, which is cool because then people, that one thing they might remember, that one thing will touch their life.
Interesting.
You could write forever. You could write for 25 years and they won't remember anything. But then you do this interview and you say one thing and they're like, I remember that guy because he said that.
Right.
So that touches people.
That's true.
That's
very
what
true.
I love. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so far in this interview, I've never talked about interviewing and the aspect of being interviewed and interviewing people. I don't believe ever in the decade that I've been on shows and programs. And
really?
Wow. Yeah, because you're there to talk about what they want to talk about. I'll give you an example. Quentin Tarantino, you know, he had his film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood come out, and he was not during this film, but I think it was Django Unchained. He was interviewed by a guy from Channel 4 News in England, and it got contentious and heated. at one point, Tarantino stated, "This is a commercial for my movie. Make no mistake about it." So, because that interviewer wanted to ask him about violence. And I'm looking at the interview, I'm going, they're putting a guy who's normally a news reporter, a guy who's used to asking people tough questions, interviewing a celebrity. And I'm going, no, that's not going to work. Because Tarantino is not going to talk about what he's talked about in the past in, number of years. So I understood precisely what Tarantino was saying. And that's what I mean by you've got to trust who you are and what you are. You've got, sometimes, as Nancy Reagan said, you just have to say, no, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't want to discuss it. It's not relevant. Now, sometimes you have hard interviews and people say, I don't want to talk about that. And they're being deceptive and they're being deceitful. But what Tarantino was doing in that interview was the right thing for him to do. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust your ability in being interviewed to say no. It's like Jodie Foster said in an interview, I think in Playboy magazine, I think it was. I'm not quite sure. But she said, no, it's to an interviewer, she said, no, it's your job to ask, and it's my job to say no. And I thought that was a great encapsulation of a number of aspects of interviewing. So as somebody being interviewed, I just felt I had to trust myself. And I had to, but you have to wait. Somebody's asking you a question, you've got to go with whatever they're asking and try to do the best by yourself. But you also have to make the conversation interesting.
You do have to make it interesting.
And this is far more interesting than a number of interviews I've given, even on subjects that are themselves fascinating, because I don't consider myself a great interviewee. I've listened to myself on other shows and I've gone, because I don't come from a background where you're trained to give interviews. As a journalist and writer, I'm basically prepared to interview people, but never to be interviewed. It was something that I learned on the fly by being on radio shows, by being on talk shows, by being on podcasts. I had to learn it one interview at a time. And so It's been an education every time I've been interviewed. I don't know how many journalists will admit this.
You guys, wouldn't
that's
it be
what
more
I will
interesting
admit.
If you saw an interview where a celebrity tore off their mic because they got asked a question that they were not comfortable with and they stormed off and their publicist ran in and said, oh, the interview's off? Or would it be more interesting if that celebrity said, no, I'm not going to answer that, and just went on with it? I mean, obviously it would be more interesting to watch them say no and continue. But why can't they handle that? This is what I've always wondered. Why can't they be a big adult and handle any question, anything? I've always wondered. But they are a baby and they run off.
Well, you've been an actress for a number of years, so you've been in LA and what is called Hollywood, which is actually a community in Los Angeles. But people think of Hollywood in a metaphorical way, but it's an actual community in Los Angeles, as we both know.
Yes.
And it's interesting because you've been in that community, and I lived in LA twice, and I dealt with celebrities some of the time. I never had anybody run off from me during an interview and storm that way. But you have to look at people's ego. You have to look at their personalities. Some people just don't like dealing with the press, which is understandable. They don't like the media, which is understandable. Like our current president, who shall not be named.
We are not really, we're pretty neutral around here.
Yeah, he who will not be named. But some people just don't have the capacity to deal with media and to deal with interviews. They just can't handle it, or conversations for that matter. And so you make a very good point. I've never
Plus,
thought of
don't
it
you
that
think-
much because I never had those problems. Go ahead.
Right, but Albert, I think people get so conditioned to work like that because they're so used to somebody doing all their dirty work for them that they forget. You know, like a woman, she could be with a very wealthy man for many years, and then they break up, and she does not even know how to use an ATM machine because everything's been handed to her. Everything's been done for her, and it happens quickly. And then, poof, you have no control over yourself, really, of every single aspect. And I think that's sad because I think it's good when we do. We can take care of ourselves no matter what happens. Don't you think that's important?
I think it does. You know, I've noticed that with some women who have been divorced and being a guy, I'm a single guy who's never been married, no children. And as a single guy, I've had to live on my own a few times, and obviously, and move somewhere, move to a city. You know, I didn't know anyone in Seattle when I moved there. I didn't know anyone in Molokai when I moved there. So I'm kind of, even for some men are also kind of helpless. Like I was in the building I live in, there was a woman who was, I think she was coming up from the laundry. And she's like, oh, I'm washing my boyfriend's clothes. I'm like, what, he can't wash his own clothes? I'm like, I don't understand a man who can't do his own laundry because I've done my own laundry since I was a teenager. You know, like
I know.
There's something men I don't get. Like, I don't trust a man who doesn't do his own laundry. That's
Might be an excuse. It might be an excuse. I mean, come on now, right? So the woman in her place, he's thinking that's her place to do it for him, quote unquote, hit her place.
I can handle my own laundry. I don't need anybody to wash it. I'm sure,
since you have been on your own all these years. But I want to go back to a long time ago when you were a little boy, or when did it start where I'm sure you had some burning passion inside of you that I want to write, I have to write, I want to write. And it's a two-part question, though. A, when did that happen? And B, at first, were you writing what you really wanted to write, or was it just because you had to pay the bills? And then if that was so, when did it shift to where you were writing really what you wanted to write?
Wow, another great question. I'm just impressed with the questions you're asking, Barbara. It's really great. I never get asked this kind of stuff on shows because I'm usually talking about other subjects. But going back in terms of when I wanted to be a writer, in terms of journalism, again, I'm probably going to get flack for this, but what the hell? The kind of interest in journalism sprang from the fact that I used to collect comics and I used to collect Superman. And of course, the alter ego of Superman was Clark Kent, and he wrote for the Daily Planet. So the interest in becoming a journalist sprang from reading Superman comics and from Clark Kent being a reporter.
I want to say something.
Wait, I'm sorry, Albert. Hold on. Johnny has something to say. Go ahead,
okay.
Johnny.
It's actually kind of funny that you say that because, see, I was talking to my father about this one time, and I said, I don't understand why be a reporter, why not be a policeman? I was talking to him about that. And he said that, well, the idea of being a reporter is that he could always be on the scene, And then I actually sat down one time and I said I wanted to come up with the most annoying job of Superman would probably be bodybuilder, because he can eat whatever he wants and not gain any weight. He can just go to the bar, to the gym, and just eat donuts all day long, and then like I would just sit around, eat donuts, and then lift 500 pounds, and then basically
and all the carbs go to your muscles.
Yeah, and then
that would be
eat
wonderful.
basically eat nothing but sugary lard, is all I would eat. Just eat nothing but sugary lard. And they just say, this is what it is. Yeah. But that's funny.
Powers would be awesome.
I mean, Superman, I always thought it was kind of interesting about him wanting to be a reporter. Why not be a policeman? I never could figure that out,
Because he wanted to blend into the public, I think, without people noticing he was Superman. Am I right about that?
Well, that's part of him being Clark Kent. But
yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with, it makes sense. He's a reporter. He's a journalist. He's aware of what's going on in regards to news. And I think it gives him a good cover, a legend, as they would say in the intelligence field, to be able to, go into a phone booth or elsewhere and get into his outfit and go off and
But didn't I say he was able to blend in that way? He was a reporter. He was working in an office, and he was able to blend in. But also, it's exciting, too, because you got the next best story. And, that makes for a great comic because there's always material to write about. So I think we just figured out the whole reason for that comic.
Okay,
Now, Barbara, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Okay. You're flipping it on yourself.
But because I'm curious, like I had said
Albert,
earlier.
You can ask me a couple questions if you promise to go back to my original 2-part question, okay?
Okay. I had thought I had answered that, but...
Well, no.
Oh, I guess I didn't get the other part.
You got stimulated by Superman and all that when you were young, but you didn't answer the second part question, which was about, at first, was it just to pay the bills? Were you always writing about what you wanted to write about, or was it paying the bills? And then, if so, when did that change? So we'll get back to that, but go ahead with your questions.
Well, let me just go ahead and answer that, and then I'll go to the questions.
Okay.
When I first started, it was in 1994, and I was 24 years old. I had graduated from a liberal arts college in Hawaii, here in Hawaii, called the University of Hawaii-West Oahu, and I had a bachelor's degree in the humanities. I had studied English. It was a liberal arts college, so they gave you a degree in a broad area. So English was in the humanities, and I got a degree in the humanities. I guess if I studied psychology, I would get a social sciences degree, back to social science. In any event, I graduated in 1993, May of 93. And before I became a freelancer, my first job out of college after looking for work was working in radio. I was working for an oldies rock station, and I played oldies rock music, pop music. So Beatles, Stones, Doors, Birds, I guess you name it, Led Zeppelin, all kinds of classic music. And I did that briefly. And then I was unemployed again, and I was fed up with being unemployed. And for some reason, to this day, I don't know why, but for some reason I thought freelance. I knew nothing about freelancing. I had never freelanced in my life before. I had helped start a newspaper at the college I was at. They didn't have a newspaper at that point. So I had wrote a column or something and written stories. But and I had a background in high school. I was in my high school newspaper. But I didn't major in journalism because there was no journalism major at the school I went to, at the college I went to. So I never studied journalism, and or never majored in it either. And so I was unemployed in the summer of 1994, and I was at a radio. I was looking for a radio job, and to be honest, had I found another radio job playing music, I wouldn't be a writer and journalist to this day. I would have probably been in radio. I'd probably have a show on Blog Talk Radio. Who knows? But that was the beginning it started August in 1994. I was going through the phone book because I had done that with radio stations, calling them up, trying to get work. Went in the phone book and called up newspapers and magazines for whatever reason. Again, I don't know what spurred me to do this. I wasn't a freelancer, had no experience freelancing, knew nothing about freelancing, but I decided to try this out. Had nothing left to lose. So I call up this one newspaper, and they said, yeah, we're not really looking for freelancers, but we would like somebody to review films. I go, oh, great. And so I sent them a review, and they decided, nah, we're not interested in that. But in the meantime, I had sold an article to a family publication, and then sold another couple articles to a senior citizens publication. I think it's called Hawaii Senior Lifestyles or something, where I was interviewing the governor candidates and lieutenant governor candidate in the election that year in Hawaii. And that's how it all began. The article that I sold to the family magazine was about family and children's film in 1994. And I got fortunate because the big film that year was Lion King. That was destroying things at the box office. So I was writing about some of these family films, or at least PG-rated films. And so I was fortunate. I think when I look back, I think, like anything, luck plays a factor. And the reality was that the 90s were a good time to start freelancing. And I think they were a good time to be a journalist. Unlike
wow. You were lucky.
It
It sounds like you've written always what you wanted to write about.
For the most part, I was never. You have to write what will sell because you're pitching, and also I accepted assignments. The if you could call it the secret to my success, if you could call me a successful writer, was the fact that I mostly wrote on assignment. And so I mostly got assignments from newspapers, magazines, publications, and that's, I think, the reason for my being able to survive. It's a much tougher world out there for journalists and people in the media now. I was reading a statistic just this year that said over 7,000 jobs in media have disappeared. They've been lost. You see layoffs, publications, and major newspapers and some smaller newspapers folding, mergers happening. I think it was McClatchy, that group of newspapers. I think they're going to be taken over. You're seeing shifts in media, of course, because of dislocation, because of technology, and also because of advertising, lots of advertising. Google and Facebook and all these online mega giants, if you want to call it. I don't like the word mega giant, but are sucking up all the ad revenue and taking a lot of money out that would have gone to newspapers and magazines.
A lot of changes.
Yeah, a lot of changes. So I think I started at about the right time. And I started at a time when the internet was relatively new as a phenomenon, as a public phenomenon. And I started, I made the transition from, I would like to say from the Neolithic era to the postmodern era, so to speak. From using word processors and typewriters to using the internet and email. So it's been kind of an interesting ride. And as for the very last part of your question, I think having done a blog for the first time in the past 2 years, which is my medium.com blog, in which I deal with media issues relating to the news industry, and also mostly current events. I'm able to choose whatever I want to write about with the blog. It's just all me. And anyone can do that with a blog. But when I was writing articles, I mostly took assignments, and I did pitch. So I did have the confidence that I could write what I was interested in and what I wanted. But mostly I had to write what other people wanted and what other people were interested in. And I think that's part of the reason that I was able to survive was I was flexible. I didn't just go, it's all about me and what I want to write. But writing the blog is purely me. It's 100% what I'm interested in. But as for my career, I don't know. I was able to write what I was interested in to a good extent. But I just had the freedom to write. Where being a staff writer, you're just going to get assigned what some editor wants you to write. That's it. You know, unless you can find a way to weasel out of it, you're going to be writing that story, or you're going to be covering that candidate if it's an election year, which this year will be, 2020 will be. You know, you've got to, the thing about the major media and mainstream media is they give you the assignment and they give you the story, you got to take it. Whereas I could turn down assignments if I didn't want it. Hey, we would like you to do this. Nah, I don't want to do that. But I took the work most of the time because I had to. Hawaii's an expensive state. California is an expensive state.
It is.
Getting a little expensive. So I just took the work. So I just work. But that took a toll on me to a certain extent. Now I realize it. Because I've been retired for the past nearly 3 years. And I realized that I really wasn't kind to myself in many respects as a person. I didn't have a vacation from 1994 till 2007, 2008 I finally took one. So 13, 14 years I didn't have a vacation. So I've only had a couple of vacations in my life. And
like a
so
workaholic.
Yeah, basically. I hate to admit that, but I realized 10 years ago when I was in L.A., I realized I was a workaholic. And it was...
Well, I like it that you were able to move with the times, because people, they're not going to die with the times if they are able to move along with technology and learn the new way is. You know, people say, oh, it's so sad, all these old music producers, you know, the new guys are running them out. Yeah, but maybe if they change the way they look at things, the way they did things, and the new way things are moving, they wouldn't have been gone. I mean, you have to.
Right.
That's the way the world is. We're ever changing, and I love technology. It makes life so much more easy. So, hey, you got to do it if you want to stay up with the times and keep yourself out there, and that's what I've noticed you do.
Yeah. You know, Facebook, Twitter, I just got on Instagram, but that's mostly I've started getting into photography. So, you know, taking photos and, you know, it was something I just started this year because I would go to Comic Cons because I'm a sci-fi fan. And there'd be all these cosplayers, and I would take photos of cosplayers and so forth. So I'm on Instagram, mostly.
Okay, well, while we're on that subject, Albert, could you please tell us all your handles? Because I was trying to look you up, and there are a few different Albert Laniers, but there was a photographer, so maybe I did have the right person. But I've got your Facebook, which is Albert Lanier, ALBERT LANIER, everybody. That's Facebook, and everybody can look you up there. But what about Twitter and Instagram?
So Twitter is @Critic Incorporated. So again, that's Twitter @Critic Incorporated. And Instagram is the other side. So that's the Al Show. I forget how it is. And I'm an actor on the side, so it notes, I think, that I'm actor and then photo hobbyist, which is what it states there. So, yeah.
Okay,
so the
how
Al
do you
Show,
find your blog? Your blog.
Oh, that's right. I believe the link for that is medium.com/@thedoctor50. Again, that's medium.com/@thedoctor50. So that's my blog.
Is Dr. DR or spelled out doctor?
let's see, medium.com at THEDOCTOR 50.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I'm going to look you up right now. So this is something interesting now that I'm going to let you ask your questions. When you did say that, Barbara, let me ask you a couple questions. It was so funny because I was taking a beat and realizing how am I feeling about that. And it does change because when you're interviewing somebody, that's a different feeling than being interviewed, which we talked a lot about in the beginning of the show. And all of a sudden I started feeling, ooh, oh my gosh, drum rolls coming. Oh my gosh, a little bit, okay, the like adrenaline rush was coming. Like, yeah, you don't know what you're going to be asked, right?
That's right. That's right.
It's so
That's
different.
So
it really is different.
Now, I have a couple questions at least, 2, 3. The first was, I know that you are, besides being Playboy Playmate, and you're a ballroom dancer, which I think is pretty impressive. That's not an easy line of dancing to be in.
True.
You are also an actress, and you were telling me earlier when we had this conversation that it wasn't something that you sought out. How did you wind up being an actress?
Well, here's the thing. Acting was never a big passion of mine, but when I became a playmate, you're just thrust in front of all these producers, and you just have pretty much a lot handed to you on a silver platter. And yes, you still have to go audition, but everybody wants the playmate. You have to be able to perform. Yes, you have to be able to act. You have to have some talent. But the parts are not huge, big, running the whole film roles, okay?
Right.
But a lot of people couldn't do it. A lot of people couldn't even do that. And I so happened to be able to have enough talent to be able to get a lot of roles. And here they start coming in. And, wow, that was exciting. But it was not my burning passion in my heart to be an actress. It just wasn't. I enjoyed getting the part. But to take it to the next level, I never really wanted to do that. I would buy acting classes. And sometimes I just never even showed up. I would never even go, and these things are expensive. I'd be like, oh, my gosh, I just don't want to do it. And you know what? If you don't want to do it, that's not your passion. When it came to dancing, I couldn't wait to get up so early and go to the studio and practice 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, and became a United States champion 2 times. That was a burning passion. I had to do it, and I had to be the best. But acting, no, I didn't have that. And I think it let some people down, which that gave me added pressure because I'd have friends say, oh, my gosh, I saw you on Nightstand like 3 times on this Nightstand show, which was a comedy. And, oh, you're so good and your timing and all that. And it made me just try again. But you know what? If you don't have that burning passion for something, you just don't. You just don't. Like, you're not going to make that happen if it's not there. And so that's where it's at with my acting.
Right.
What?
So it's funny you mentioned Nightstand because I just happened to see you years ago on Nightstand. And I was a fan of that show. And I would agree with what some of the people said. I thought you were quite good on Nightstand. And I wanted to ask about Nightstand. Because like I said, I'm a fan of the show. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's out on DVD, but I'd love to see the show again in like a complete series format. But I was curious about Nightstand. How was it? How did you get Nightstand, and what was it like being on the show? Because Tim Stack was, I believe, the star of the show. So how did they?
Oh, he was so
did
funny.
they find out about you? I'm curious about that. And how was it doing the show?
Oh, same thing. I would just go to the audition and I would get the part. And once you get one part and you do really well at that part, because here's the thing. I just did a film called Tooken, And the director was John Asher, and he told me, Barbara, we all on the set, there's the model who's coming in for the little part, even if it's just one line. We're all like, oh, no, this is going to be a long day, because that one line, that's important, because you have to have the proper timing, because you could ruin the whole movie with one bad act can just make the movie look like go from an A to a B. And I never looked at it like that. And I knew the importance of the role. I'd have to read the whole script just to do like a little part like that, just to know it, to make it make sense. And he goes, you came in and you nailed it. He goes, we couldn't believe it. I mean, they were giving me a standing ovation after I was done. And he goes, that's why you got the standing ovation, because we were like, oh, no, this is going to be horrible. You know, we're going to have to do it over and over, and it's never going to be good. And he goes, and it's so true, because if you look at an actress, and she's even a major motion picture, and there's not a lot of dialogue, but it's in their eyes and it's in their face, they can totally bring you into that. I think I can do that. And yes, I do have acting talent, but to pursue it, I don't have the passion. So I don't know what is wrong with me.
I could say from, strangely enough, being an actor here, I didn't want to be an actor. I just found myself, because Honolulu, Hawaii, there isn't a lot of acting work. And I found myself basically being cast in a part that was supposed to be played by a real football coach. So I played a high school football coach in a student film. And that led to like 4 other films. And I just said, okay, I'll go along with this acting thing. I never went to an acting class. I never had any training or background in acting. I did take a theater class in college, but that was an elective to get an easy aid. And so I wasn't I'm not a trained actor, and it's not something I talk about other than if I'm specifically on a show to talk about it, which I've been interviewed a couple of times about being an actor. But yeah, I would agree with you. I don't personally, I'm a stage actor now primarily, but it's not something I'm wanted to do. It's something I found myself doing. I'm an accidental actor in that regard. But
kind of like me, right?
I'm curious about to get back to Nightstand. I'm curious about Nightstand. Like, what was it dealing with Tim Stack? And what was the atmosphere like? I'm just curious because I'm a fan of.
You know what? It was completely professional. We went in there, we did our job. We had our behind the scenes, a little bit of chuckles, a little bit of laughs. He was a great guy. But I also was on Married with Children. And then that was surreal for me because I was acting with Bud Bundy. And then afterwards, he was just like such a young guy. And he was like in his car and they were listening to music and his big tennis shoe was hanging out one side. He was trying to like act cute and sexy and kind of flirtatious, and it was just surreal though because my brother and I grew up watching that mostly in junior high and high school, and then I end up that's my first acting part in front of 2 live audiences. So you kind of get caught up in wow, you're in Hollywood and you're actually doing it, and you're just like I want more. But then there's something tugging your heart saying, yeah, but do I really want to do this? I mean, but if I did, I would have been frustrated because I would want like a bigger role and a bigger role and a bigger role. But that would have made me work harder, and I probably would have been very successful. So unfortunately, I just didn't have that burning passion for it. But these experiences were funny and fun, and I like that you asked me about that. But nothing about the Nightstand really stuck out except for just getting there, getting in the makeup chair, knowing my lines, thinking about them, making sure I did it properly, and it was successful. And that was day in, day out with modeling, acting, whatever I was doing, I wanted it to be the best. I wanted it to be successful. I wanted it to be on time. I wanted it to look good. I wanted to do a good job. This was my main goal.
Well, I think that's a great attitude to have. It's that straightforward professional attitude. I think that's a wonderful mindset. And I couldn't leave, of course. I couldn't without asking about Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery.
Oh,
and
thanks.
This is what allowed me to come on the show. Had I not seen the Fembot, I don't know I would have asked to come on the show. Your picture that was on
Isn't it
Facebook.
funny?
I didn't know you were one of the
Was that on my
Fembot.
Playboy Playmate group that I created?
I
the
think
Playboy
so.
Playmate. And believe it or not, nobody had Playboy Playmate. Nobody got it, and I just typed it in, and it was available. And I'm like, mine.
Right. And so I'm curious about that film. I love Austin Powers, and I'm curious about how it was to do Austin Powers, how it was to do that film, what the atmosphere was like on the set. Working with Mike Myers.
This is a crazy story. This is a crazy story, and nobody knows this story except for the producers, which were pulling their hair out and very upset. Okay, so we had about 3 to 4 auditions. You know, the first audition, then a callback. This is a major motion picture, which we didn't know, but it became a blockbuster, which has a lot of power, but it had some very big names in it. So it was a very big deal when I kept getting these callbacks, and my manager was like super excited about it. So I landed the role as the Fembot. Well, I got there, and guess what? There was 6 other fembots in makeup chairs. So we were all looking around at each other, and I didn't know then, but they were all thinking the same thing. So I get on the phone to him, and I said, hey, I thought I got the fembot role, like the main fembot role. There's like everybody else is here getting their makeup on, tons of them. And he calls the producers. Well, there was this huge uproar, and all these fembots with like not our full makeup on, but like the wig, and one person had the powder on, one person had the pink outfit on, one person had the wig on. We were all in disarray. We were all in the producer's trailer and mad. Everybody was mad, demanding, what? I'm the fembot. I'm the fembot. I'm the fembot. No, I'm the fembot. I am not kidding you guys. It was crazy. It was
Sounds
crazy.
like Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm the Fembot. That'd make it interesting.
And you know what? Now that everybody knows the story, they'll probably do some kind of skit about it. Somebody should. It was hilarious. But everybody raised such a stink about it.
I was going to say, you know, it's a shame that we can't get all 5 of you back and then get you all 5 back to you on the
7.
show or something.
There were 7 of us.
7. I mean, do you know who the other people were? Do you remember who the other people were?
Well, I do. All you have to do is look up IMDb, and you have a list of all the actresses on who were fembots.
Okay.
Yes, and we all had one line. And guess what? Here's Hollywood for you. We had a huge script. We had a lot of lines to prepare. We had a huge paragraph. And so we thought, we have this big role. And we get there, and they hand us our line. You cannot resist us, Mr. Powers. So not only do we not have like this big role that we thought we had one line, and there was like 6 others. So, I mean, now that I look back at it, I would never have gotten mad. I would have just been so happy to have been there. But when you're young, things like that get you upset.
It's a shame because,
it was ridiculous.
This is what I'm going to say. I was going to think of another Mike Myers movie, Shrek. Well, they did a spin-off movie for Puss in Boots. They should have done one for what do you call it, the fembots. I mean, that actually would have been an interesting movie. If they called you up and asked you to do a fembot movie with the other girls, would you have done it?
Back then?
Now.
Well, Johnny, I mean, that's a kind of a vague question. I'd have to really see all the details about what they were offering.
I understand.
Well, the Austin Powers film itself was a pastiche of various aspects of 60s spy films, from Inlight
James
Flint,
Bond.
the Dean
Martin
Martin Silencers film. That's where the fembots came from. I think was the Dean Martin kind of women in,
one of the
films.
things they made fun of was they made fun of the fact that
I used to be a film review. I used to review films for Ain't It Cool News, and for several years. I used to do film festivals here in Honolulu and interview actors and other personalities. That's a whole other show because meeting the celebrities and talking to some of them. But yeah, I used to review films, and so I had that still in my mind, that film reviewer type personality, where you look at something, you start analyzing it, and I'm coming back to that sort of thing now, which is one of the reasons I did this show, was because I'm now doing more entertainment-related material now, focusing more on film and TV and other aspects, and
that's
not
why
as much.
You contacted. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay, because we got off of that for a minute, but you were on either the official Barbara Moore on Facebook, and then I posted my fembot picture, and I put I'm far right, and then you contacted me. But if I wouldn't have posted, see, everything, that's why I think everything happens for a reason, because if I wouldn't have done that film a long time ago, then you wouldn't have been contacting me. I think it all kind of works like that. And then you're doing these writings on these films, and look at, I have the wealth of information of behind the scenes on some of these things, like Married with Children, and I mean, that's interesting to people. And I mean, people are still, just last week, I have dolls, fembot dolls sent to me to sign, like a huge box of Austin Powers memorabilia, and I just saw it's on Netflix right now. The International Man of Mystery first Austin Powers, which I was in, is playing right now. I'm still getting tons of residuals, which is totally cool. And so it's not dying. It's always going to be out there, and it's cool. And I was in it, so that's interesting stuff. Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
I mean, I have to come back to the show because we have to just talk film and TV, because asking you about Nightstand and Married with Children and Austin Powers has gotten me interested in you as an actress, and the other aspects, but definitely need to deal with that. And I could talk more about my having reviewed films and some of those celebrities that I've talked to over the years.
And I'm not saying that I'm not doing acting parts, though. I like doing them. I just don't like doing the big parts because I don't care about it. I just want to come on, like the cameo, like I've always done. That's cool to me. I like being around the people. I like making it a little better. I like to, give a little bit of myself to the project. I still do that, but I'm not pursuing it per se of like pounding the pavement, going on auditions, like going to acting school, all that. I just am me. If there is a show out there where I could just be me, I think that's called reality shows. That would be so perfect because I like just being me.
Do you really, you don't want to be on a reality show, do you?
Well, I kind of consider this a reality show, this radio show I'm on.
Oh, yeah. I think this is a better reality show than any show on TV.
Thank you. I really love what I do.
Yeah,
I mean, so much.
I don't like reality shows, to be honest. That's just my view, but like.
Well, yeah, but none that are out there right now I wouldn't be on. But I like this show that I'm doing with Johnny and Kelly so much. It brings me so much joy. I'm meeting so many people like yourself. I'm forming relationships. Like I told you today, will be a forever long-lasting friendship that we have, from the show.
Right. Well, that's amazing. Something I never thought would happen, because I never thought in terms of, I'll meet this Playboy Playmate and talk to her. It's just someone I saw years ago. I went, wow, she's really beautiful. And like anyone who models and stuff like that. And so it's been really, really great. I never thought this would happen. I never thought I'd be interviewed by somebody.
I think this is a great interview because you didn't have to come on and talk about all of your columns and all of your articles that you've written. And I mean, that's all
Right.
wonderful, and people can find that in what I'm going to announce in a second here. But you got to talk about yourself. You got to have a conversation. And that's what I love about podcasts. It's kind of like just having a conversation, and people can kind of get an inside view of like a different aspect of you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Well,
It's certainly an interview I've never given before. It's an interview. This is an interview I've never given before. I've never talked about interviewing and being interviewed and the nature, too much about my career, the basics of my career and all of that. Yeah, it's been very, very different. I've never done an interview like this. It's normally my opining about a subject or an issue or an aspect. And this has been a lot more fascinating and intriguing. Not that other interviews haven't, but
you enjoyed it?
Of course, because
Awesome.
the lovely lady interviewing me made it so much enjoyable, or so very enjoyable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Johnny did help.
It's almost like a dream come true in many respects. Like how many people could be interviewed by someone they saw, in Playboy? Like that's not something that normally
Who knows
happens.
who those other lucky people will be? That
Yeah.
comes from Aaliyah talking. Oh, by the way, when's your birthday?
April 3rd, 1970.
Okay.
April.
You don't have to say the hello. You don't have to say the year.
I know.
April 3rd, Johnny, because you know what? We do something
Yeah.
special here at Life, Laughter, Happiness. We do a birthday shout out whenever it comes time for your birthday. We always announce it and say happy birthday. And then we'll see if you're listening.
April.
So do we have another regular listener here and a YouTube subscriber, Albert?
I hope you'll subscribe to us on YouTube.
Certainly, I will try to listen as much as possible.
Okay.
Okay.
And if you can't, you can always find our shows on our YouTube channel, Life, Laughter, Happiness. And we hope that you, Albert, and all the listeners tonight will not forget to subscribe to our channel and find us all across the board on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'd like to talk about Albert's Facebook. It's Albert Lanier, ALBERTLANIER on Facebook, and at Twitter you can find him at Critic Inc. CRITICINC, which I just followed you, by the way. And you're going to have to tell us your Instagram because that was a little confusing. I tried to look up the Dr. 50 and it wasn't you.
Oh, that's Medium. My Medium is medium.com/@thedoctor50. And my Instagram is The Al Show.
Okay, so that before the Instagram, that was how to find your blog, correct?
Right, correct.
Okay,
so
awesome, because
the
that's what you're
Instagram
doing
is The Al
currently.
Show.
Okay.
What am I doing currently?
The blog, right, which is the Medium.
Right. Well, yeah.
Dr. 50.
Blog is ongoing, whenever I feel like writing it. Currently, as I've been in the midst of promoting interviews that I've done. I did an interview with Crooked Table, which is a podcast, and analyzed Stanley Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut. And so it's my return to analyzing films and dissecting films, but this time online. And also I had an interview come out on podcast Parallax Views, where I was true crime, which is something I wasn't interested in doing, but the host was interested in. And so I did an episode for Parallax Views on Bob Crane and his death, Bob Crane being the star of Hogan's Heroes. And last month, the podcast was the Robert Blake case, the death of Bonnie Lee Bakley, his wife, but the Robert Blake case. Yeah. So that I've done those two. I don't know if I'm going to do any more true crime. Maybe I do want to do an episode, maybe for another podcast, about the death of Bobby Fuller. But the true crime thing is something I didn't cover crime as a reporter. I never had anything to do with it as a journalist. But I found myself doing true crime, and so it's something that's really come up in this year alone. So unexpected.
Wow. So Robert Blake,
so
he was acquitted. Is that correct? Like he's free,
he was
right?
acquitted in the criminal trial, and the civil case he was found liable. So he
Isn't that crazy when people are walking around and they were not found guilty in the criminal, but they were? I've always wondered about that, Albert. And then in the civil, but they have to walk around on this planet Earth when everybody's looking at them like, "Oh, you're guilty." I don't even get that. Can you just explain that, like in a nutshell, like if you can quickly? I don't know if you can explain that quickly.
Right. I don't pretend to be an attorney. I just have a bachelor's degree, not a law degree. But the criminal trial, I believe the differences in it is that it's what is necessary. Generally, in any kind of criminal trial, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. If it's a jury trial, which this was, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, let me step back. The burden of proof is what the prosecutor has. And so they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that, in this case, Robert Blake was guilty. And what the defense has to do is they have to be able to create reasonable doubt amongst the jury. So they, as the prosecution has the burden of proof, all the defense has is basically trying to create reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors or a judge, for that matter, if it's a judge. And in the civil, I think, and of course it's a preponderance of evidence in the criminal trial. With the civil trial, it really depends on the burdens because it's financial. Criminal, you go to jail you go to prison if you're found guilty. In the case of Robert Blake, I believe it was murder with special circumstances. So he would have been eligible for death row, the death penalty, had he been found guilty. In the case of the civil trial, it's financial. So the standards are different. And so he was found liable, guilty, and I think owed, forget how many $1 million, be in my notes.
But do these people ever?
I
hear these people have to owe, and then they never even pay.
Well, yeah, it depends on your if you run an assets check, what they're basically what they're worth, what their value. In the case of Blake, I believe he got tapped out because he was worth several $1 million. And how much he was
I know,
worth
but Albert, wouldn't you rather be free than be in prison? I mean, I think about that a lot. Like, they don't have blankets, they don't have pillows. I mean, have you ever just really thought about year after year, day after day, even seconds just ticking away, and you're just in like an animal cage with bars with somebody locking you up? I mean, that's got to do something to you so horrible. I mean, you can't just have freedom. You can't have space. You can't have privacy. You don't have anything. And this is years. How do these people not go crazy? Absolutely insane. How? I don't know.
That's a good question to ask a prisoner. I've never been in a position to ask him that. Okay. I've never been in any position. I've never interviewed a prisoner.
That's another huge
I've never
subject,
interviewed a prisoner, so I don't know.
Don't you ever like cuddle up into your big comforter and your nice pillow and say, "Oh, tomorrow I get to sleep in because I'm self-employed, I'm freelance, and you know what? Life is good." Don't you ever think, God, what if I was in prison? Ever think that?
I don't know about the prison part because I never thought about that. But I went through financial reversal several years ago, and I did think about what it would be like to wind up on the streets. That I have thought about. So
yeah.
curling up, being in bed, oh yeah, it's nice. I'm in bed, and, here in this apartment, it's much better than being out on the street. And
I
that I
completely
have
think
thought.
about the prison thing all the time. I must be weird
Really?
because almost every night there's something going on with me. Let's not put it in the universe that I'm ever going to go to prison. I'm going to be extra careful not to. But I'm telling you, I think about this all the time.
Interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank
I
you
never would have thought that.
coming on.
Here, I don't think
Everybody
you're the first person I would have thought would think that.
I do. I
Yeah.
think about not having a blanket and how horrible it would be. Maybe because I know people who I think about it. I just do. And there's all those shows. I know it's kind of weird, but that's another show. But we've done that before, Albert. I've interviewed somebody who is trying to get a person out who was convicted for a life that had good behavior for 30 years. And there's so many things to write about. I really think that you are fortunate to have had such a wonderful life in 25 years, because you were saying in like 1995 or something, you had a turning point, and that was 94, and I was a new playmate, so we kind of were having a turning point at the same time in life, and that's a lot of body of work, and you're so fortunate to be able to have such a wonderful career and to have led such a wonderful full life being a writer. I think it's fascinating, and I hope everybody connects with you and follows you, and I hope that we can have you back on the show again.
I'd love to come back on the show. Absolutely.
Really?
Because this is a great conversation. And I've never had an interview like this before, so it's intriguing.
That's what you say.
And you're a wonderful interviewer. You really are. And I could see why they've had you on the show. You really are.
Well,
you're
thanks
really
everyone. Thank you for coming on.
Johnny's
Albert.
not trying to cut you. Hey, Johnny's not trying to cut you off, Albert. But we Blog Talk Radio, we only have 90 minutes, so I think we're cutting it close on being cut off. And I want to be able to say goodbye and give you a proper goodbye. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and don't forget to follow us and subscribe on YouTube. Life, laughter, happiness, everybody. Thanks, Albert.
Thank you,
Albert.